ranger. Everybody does that, right? His name was Jim Capps. Took us on a snowshoe walk several times. But one time we were at the Green Mountain Ranch, okay, right across the street from the Green Mountain Trailhead. Jim took us out into the meadow and stuff, coming back to the parking lot. He said, and that was, well, I can't tell you because his name is going to come up. Henry Schnorr. That's Henry Schnorr's cabin. He was engaged to Kitty Harbison. And I said, Harbison? I know that name. So I talked to Jim a little bit. We went back to his office at the Kawanishi Visitor Center, and Jim sat down and showed me everything the park knew about the Harbison Ranch. It was about 4 pieces of paper. Little tiny manila folder. I said, we got to solve this problem. So that's what started my background and my research on the Harbison Ranch and how I've developed it into what you're going to see today. I did this program as a ranger-led walking tour for Rocky Mountain National Park for 15 seasons. I had to stop because of COVID, and that program has been discontinued now. But I did that for 15 years, and then I took that program on the road to the libraries and museums and senior centers 11 years ago, and as part of my company. I am announcing tonight for one of the very first times that I am closing my company at the end of December. I will not be doing these presentations any longer. I stopped doing private tours into Rocky Mountain National Park for this summer so I can tour more with my senior centers and libraries and stuff, but I will be shutting down my entire company at the end of December of this year. Corinne and I need to spend some time together. There's several other reasons also, but basically Corinne and I need to go camping. And I haven't been able to do much of that in the last few years. So, but anyway, but all of what you're going to see tonight is because of her husband, Jim Capps. What a great ranger he was. And just, he really was. I wish Jim was here tonight. He is recovering. He's doing much better, Ellen tells me. And we're very happy that he's on the road to recovery. And we miss him very dearly tonight. Many of you know me. I've been asked to give you, 10 minutes or so about me and Corinne, a little bit of background. Most of you know I can't say hello in 10 minutes. Okay? But my background, Mom said that I was about 5 months old the first time I came to Grand Lake. I'm a little older than that now, and but I can actually say I've been coming all my life. And I don't remember that first day, but I remember a lot of them in between. So my grandmother moved her cabin out to the property that I now live on in 1961, and the family stayed there many times. So Grand Lake is my home. There's no question about it. After the fire, I was asked by many people when we lost our home, are we moving? Are we leaving Grand Lake? No, Grand Lake's my home. I'm not leaving Grandma's property. There's no way I'm leaving. So we're here for the duration, folks. Sorry, you got to keep putting up with me. Anyway, that's a quick about my background. You will hear a little bit more. I forced Corinne and I met at a company working together down in Albuquerque, actually a forklift dealership. We're both certified forklift operators, something most people don't know about me. I'm also a hot air balloon pilot. I was in Albuquerque, thanks to my first mother-in-law, not Corinne's mom, but history is very important to me. It started with Jim Capps and another opportunity that I had. My parents both passed away close together, and my brothers and sisters and I sold their house down in Thornton. And I walked into the Coppman House Museum one Sunday when we were up visiting, and the volunteer president at that time, Patty Madison, I know a bunch of you remember Patty, I said, I'd like to make a contribution in my parents' name. And Patty said, that's wonderful. She was the volunteer president at the time. $1,000? How'd you like to be on our board of directors? And it was almost that fast. A year and a half later, I was president of the Grand Lake Area Historical Society, and it's been just a wonderful, wonderful ride since then. It has gotten me into the history world in numerous ways. So, as Ellen mentioned a lot about me earlier. So, but let's get on to our program tonight. This evening, guys, please forgive me. I'm going to sit down. Several people have already asked about my splint. I had an argument with a stepladder 2 days ago. The ladder won. So I'm going to sit down a little bit and be able to extend out. But Let me know if you can't hear me. This evening I'm going to talk about the Harbison family. Truly, this was an ordinary family. I think they led an extraordinary life. And when we're done this evening, I hope that you feel the same way about them. Okay? But this truly was a family that was here in Grand Lake. But before I get to Grand Lake, okay, is that better for you? Before I get to Grand Lake, I'm going to take you back in time. I'm going to introduce you to, well, maybe I am, Andrew Harbison. This is Dad. This is the father and the whole thing that we're going to talk about this evening. Andrew Harbison lived in Pennsylvania with a wife and 2 children, and he was asked to serve in the Civil War. So he volunteered with the Union Army. He served about 8 months. Then he went back to his wife and 2 children in central Pennsylvania. About 6 months later, like many volunteers in the Civil War, he was asked to serve a second time. He volunteered, he served a second time, left his family behind. He was in a terrible battle. Nobody knew it at the time, but this was toward the end of the Civil War. This was the Battle of Cold Harbor, just outside of Richmond, Virginia. Andrew Harbison, was injured in that battle. His left heel was shot off. They patched him up a little bit there, and then they sent him to the Union Hospital at Jefferson Barracks, just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. Okay. There they did some more surgery on his foot. They put him with the other Union soldiers out in a tent hospital outside. Out there he contracted an ear infection and lost hearing in one ear. So for the rest of his life, he walked on the toes of his left foot and couldn't hear out one ear. That was ordinary life. He was in the hospital for a little over a year. He went back to his wife and 2 children in central Pennsylvania. He said, you know, it's filthy around here, but that Missouri area, that was beautiful. Why don't we move out there and start life over again? Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to get on a train and I'm going to head west. I'll send some money back to you and bring you out eventually. So that's what he did. He got on a train with his 11-year-old son, Harry, and they headed west. But Andrew didn't have any money. So he had to get off of the train every now and then and work odd jobs, ranching and farming, wherever he could find a few dollars, send a few dollars back to his wife, and he and his son, Harry, continued west. It took almost a year and a half for them to get from central Pennsylvania to the western edge of Missouri. In that time, he told his son Harry that his mother had died and his little sister was now being raised by her grandparents, which is true, she was. Okay. So, in western Missouri, right at the edge of Missouri and Nebraska and Kansas, Andrew met another lady. Her name was Mary Quinlan. And they got married and subsequently started another family. I'll call it the second Harbison family for you, okay? But they were still moving around. So along the border of Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska, the kids were all born in 3 different places. They had 2 daughters and a son, Annie and Kitty, and their son, Rob. Okay? But while they were doing that, the older son, Harry, from the first marriage, was still living with them. But he was growing up to become a young man. He finally said, you know what, I'm almost 19 years old. I'm going to strike out on my own. I'm going to the mountains of Colorado and I'm going to be a gold miner and strike it rich. He came to Colorado. He ended up in Leadville. He was a gold miner. But you know what? The gold miners didn't get paid worth a darn. The mine owners made a lot of money, but Harry wasn't making very much money. He had met a lady by the name of Lulu. They got married. They had a son in Leadville. He said, I've got to support my family a little bit better than this. So he went to work for the United States government in their second facility of its kind in the entire United States, a fish hatchery. He learned how to raise baby rainbow trout to become big rainbow trout. Okay, big rainbow trout. So Harry was working at the fish hatchery, making a little bit of money, but people from the restaurants, especially in Leadville, kept coming to Harry and saying, would you sell us some rainbow trout so we can have them on our menu for the restaurants? Well, you're going to hear that Harry was kind of a scoundrel, but even Harry knew he could not sell federal property to somebody, okay? He couldn't get away with that. what if I start my own fish hatchery? So that's what he decided to do. He wandered around the mountains of Colorado for almost a year, and he ended up right here near Grand Lake. About a mile outside of town, he found a small lake called Carlton Lake. He said, this will be perfect for my fish hatchery. So he went back to Leadville, got his wife and son and wagon, and moved the family to Carlton Lake. Came down here to Grand Lake with a net, netted a bunch of fish, dumped them all in Carlton Lake. And they all died. Carlton Lake is a spring-fed lake. The water comes out of the ground. Fish need aeration. They need fresh running water. They need to be able to breathe some of those little air bubbles. So he said, you know, I probably should have known that. So he decided that he would bring running water to Carlton Lake. He went up and found Tonahutu Creek, put a shovel in the side of it, and let the water start flowing downhill toward Carlton Lake. This was 1879, or excuse me, 1889. 1889 and 1890, he dug a 2-mile ditch to bring fresh running water to Carlton Lake. It took him 2 summers to go 2 miles, because we still call these the Rocky Mountains. In that 2-year period of time, he and his wife didn't have a clue who Carlton was. He came down and talked to old-timers in Grand Lake. Nobody could tell him who the lake was named after. Nobody seemed to know who Carlton ever was. Okay? So Harry and his wife Lulu changed the name of the lake to what we know it as today, Columbine Lake. Everybody was saying, what Carlton Lake? I've never heard of Carlton Lake. Here's Harry's ditch. Oh, excuse me, I'm ahead of myself. This was one of the visits. The second Harbison family came out to Colorado to visit Harry. This is a studio picture. Studio pictures were very expensive. They could have been $7 or $8 each. And this is when you had to stand perfectly still while your image was burned onto a glass negative. Okay? That's Andrew on the right, and his older son Harry on the left there. Okay? You can see the name of the studio downtown. But how did they pay for the picture? Andrew was receiving a pension check from the Civil War Commission for his injury in his left foot. By the time this picture was taken, about 1890, that pension check was all the way up to $9 a month. And a picture was $7 or $8. A month's salary to have your picture taken. You didn't mess it up. Okay? But I got ahead of myself, and this is Harry at his house. As a matter of fact, that house still stands. Part of that house still stands. It's the not the clubhouse, but it's the homeowners association house up at Columbine Lake. His camera-shy wife is hiding down here in the garden. But that's Harry Harbison in front of his house there at Columbine Lake, and his fish hatchery on the side of Columbine Lake. Columbine Lake looks just like that today, doesn't it? Give or take about 300 homes. Okay? But that's Harry's fish hatchery. He got it started. After he got running water to Columbine, he came down to Grand Lake with a net, netted a bunch of trout, put them all in Columbine Lake, and they all survived. Okay? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife was here many years ago. I was still president at Grand Lake Historical. And they came up, they were doing DNA testing on all the fish in Rocky Mountain National Park. And they came over to the east side, and they met with me. And they were also testing the DNA of the trout in Columbine Lake. And they told me that the trout in Columbine Lake have the same DNA that they traced back to the fish that Harry planted in Columbine Lake well over 100 years before that. Okay. DNA testing on trout? Really? Okay, it's science. It's beyond me. But that's Harry's fish hatchery. In addition to his fish hatchery there, he was asked by the state of Colorado to run a small fish hatchery for the state of Colorado. How many of you remember seeing the fish hatchery on the North Inlet coming into Grand Lake, just in between the rapids and Grand Lake? Nobody. It's been gone since the early 1900s. Harry ran that for the state of Colorado for 3 years. He didn't do his paperwork, and they got upset with him, so they closed down the fish hatchery and it left. But Harry made himself some aluminum backpacks that he could store water in, and he would put fresh fish in there, and he would hike up to the mountain lakes and the rivers and streams and stuff to stock rainbow trout in those high mountain lakes around Grand Lake. And that's how we have the great fishing even today that we have, is because of Harry Harbison delivering. And he started selling trout to restaurants, but not just in Grand Lake. These backpacks that he made, he could haul fresh trout all the way to Georgetown and sell fresh trout to the restaurants over there, so they had it on their menu. Okay? He did it for a little bit of money. There's nothing Harry Harbison did that didn't include a little bit of money. Okay? But that's the beginnings of Columbine Lake. For those of you that may live out at Columbine or have driven out to the clubhouse on the far side, there's a wagon out in front of the clubhouse, and that's Harry Harbison's wagon. The second Harbison family, they came out to visit Harry, as I mentioned several times, because they moved around, as I mentioned, trying to make a little bit of a living. And Andrew finally went to his family and said, you know, Colorado is beautiful. Why don't we move out there and start life over again? So they did. They decided to load up their wagon, and they left Stella, Nebraska, and headed west. They ended up in Denver. Andrew got a job downtown Denver, but finally the Harbisons wanted some land of their own. So Andrew and his wife Mary homesteaded some land about 5 miles south of downtown Greeley. So they started a small ranch there. They started building buildings and stuff, but Andrew had a job downtown. He was making not very much money, but a little bit. So his wife Mary and Annie and Kitty and Rob started building the corrals and the barn and stuff like that. And Andrew would catch the trolley from Denver up to Greeley every other weekend and work the weekend at the homestead, okay? That was about 1891 when they finally moved to Colorado and started their homestead. And then 1893 hit. Some of you may not recall that our 1893 depression hit really hard. It's when the United States government devalued silver. They took silver off of our monetary system and went to the gold standard that we know today. It devastated the economy of our country. It hit Colorado especially hard. That's where the silver was coming from. Yeah, they were still mining a little bit of it in California and Nevada, but the majority of the silver being sold to the federal government was coming out of Colorado. And the government stopped buying it. One day, silver was worth $1.35 an ounce. The next morning, it was worth a nickel. Colorado's economy stopped. Andrew Harbison lost his job immediately. Within 3 days, he was out of work. No problem. I lived through the 1857 depression and everything will be fine. 6-8 months from now, everybody will be back to work. Everything will be just great. Boy, we know better than that now, don't we? But the 1893 depression, the silver bust, hit our economy really hard. By the end of 1893, Andrew still didn't have a job. He still wasn't working. But by now, he was making $9 and $10 a month from his pension check from the Civil War Commission. And even in 1893, $9 a month didn't go very far. They were getting desperate. So in 1894, they had to sell some of their livestock. They had to sell some of their wagons and their plow and stuff like that. By the end of 1894, the recession still wasn't over, and they were getting desperate. So in the springtime of 1895, they came up to visit Harry at Columbine Lake. And they said, you know what? Why don't we homestead near Grand Lake? Grand Lake's beautiful. We'll start life over again. But Mom and Dad Harbison couldn't homestead a second time. It hadn't been 5 years. You had to homestead for 5 years before you owned the property and got your land patent. It hadn't been 5 years. They didn't own their place near Greeley. So they could not homestead near Grand Lake. But the girls could. Annie, who was now 27, Kitty, who was 24, you had to be 21 to file a homestead. They decided to homestead near Grand Lake. So they came up with and met with Harry. And he said, I know just the place for your homestead. It happens to have a fresh running ditch running right through the middle of it to give you fresh running water. So they came to Grand Lake. Now Rob was only 19. Their younger brother was only 19 when they got here. Or there probably would have been 3 homesteads and my story would be all mixed up. But the 2 girls decided to do a homestead about a mile outside of Grand Lake. And that's how they became pioneers of Grand Lake. They were not the first homestead in the valley. They really weren't. The records are kind of vague. They were either fourth or seventh homestead in the Kawanichi Valley. They certainly were not first. There were several before them, we know that. But they were truly pioneers of Grand Lake. They filed their paperwork with the federal government in 1895. And they got permission to move up here in 1896, the next year. So in 1896, they decided to homestead near Grand Lake. Several times this evening, I'm going to read to you. Andrew Harbison kept a journal when he was up here, wrote in it extensively in the winter. Very rarely in the summertime, they were way too busy. But several times this evening, I'm going to read part of Andrew's journal for you. And this is what Andrew Harbison said about coming to Grand Lake. He wrote this on the about the 20th of January, 1897. He said, I arrived at Grand Lake July 15th, 1896. Annie and Kitty arrived here September 11th. Mary and Robert arrived November 1st. Since coming here, we've done considerable work on the girls' homesteads, built a cabin, and moved into it on January 8th, 1897. The first snow fell about the 25th of October. We have snow frequently since. The snow at present is about 20 inches deep. We've all had good health since coming here. The winter so far has been moderate. Ordinary life, wasn't it? 20 inches of snow on the ground in the middle of January? Sure. You know, I go up to the Harbison Ranch around the 20th of January every now and then, and that's a very, very average winter. It really is. 20, 21 inches of snow up around the Harbison Ranch is very, very typical. Both of the girls, Annie and Kitty, later in their lives would write about their life and how they saw things. Kitty, the younger one, all of her life was written on the back of 2 envelopes. Mostly had to do with livestock. Sold a cow to the Millers, bought 2 horses from the Johnsons, that kind of stuff, okay? Annie wrote extensively. She picked up her father's journal as a reminder of what was going on when, just what was happening. We know she did because she copied it word for word in places, okay? But this is what Annie wrote about coming to Grand Lake, and it starts out the same. She said, July 15th, 1896, father came to Grand Lake. September 11th, 1896, Kitty and I came to Grand Lake. November 1st, 1896, mother and Bobby came to Grand Lake. And this is where it changes. Harry and I went to Denver after them. We were storm stayed from Tuesday until Friday at the Big Chief Mine. Friday, mother and I started to walk, leading Jersey and Lady, the 2 cows. The snow was 18 inches all the way over the top of the range. We all got to the old stage stop, this side of the range near the top. That night, wet and cold. The next night, we stayed at the block home, the other side of Coulter. The next night, we got to Columbine Lake and glad to get home. I just described Berthoud Pass. The Big Chief Mine was about a half-mile west of the town of Empire. They sat there and watched it snow for at least 3 days. Just before the 1st of November, they started walking to Grand Lake, kind of. They had 2 horses. They had 4 adults, and Harry and Rob were probably on the horses breaking a little trail. But Mother and Annie were dragging a cow and a calf behind them to start a dairy ranch to provide fresh milk to the townspeople of Grand Lake. They walked to the top of Berthoud Pass that first day. It's only 17 miles. Through 18 inches of snow on top, 1st of November. Okay? What did women used to wear? Long wool skirts or dresses. What happens to wool when it gets wet, besides the fact it stinks? It gets heavy. I heard several of you say it. It gets heavy. Now walk through 18 inches of snow with a wet skirt, and it becomes a block of ice. And Annie said that first night was wet and cold. Okay? The next night they walked down, the next day they walked down from the top of Berthoud Pass to the block home, the other side of Coulter. The block home literally was a square house. It was some people that owned a house the other side of Coulter. Coulter was a stagecoach stop at the bottom of Red Dirt Hill on this side, about 4.5 miles south of current-day Granby. Of course, Granby didn't exist at that time. So they stayed there for the night, and then that third day, they just made that quick 24 miles up to Columbine Lake. Can't you walk 24 miles in a day? These people walked everywhere. Okay? And face it, the 1st of November, we all know that even if they got a little bit of snow up here, it would have melted or there might have been an inch or two. So it wasn't 18 inches all the way to Grand Lake. But, you know, they walked early. And these people, when they were walking, they got up and they were walking before the sun came up. And they were still walking after dark if that's what they needed to do to get where they were headed. And they were headed home. They had a lot of incentive to make those last few miles that day. So they made it to Columbine Lake from 5 miles south of Granby, all in one day, dragging a cow and a calf, and 2 people on horses and 2 people walking. Okay. Annie continued in her journal, she wrote, January 8th, 1897, we moved in our first little cabin. It was home, sweet home, and we were so happy. How come they were happy? Here's their first house. Well, kind of. Their first homestead cabin was this one right here. That little cabin was about 10 feet wide and about 16 feet long. All right. All 5 adults. Now the next year, to comply with the homestead law, they had to build a house on Kitty's land. This was on Annie. So Kitty's cabin was right over here off to the side, just a few feet, in 1897. But the first year and first winter, they stayed in that small cabin. How come they were so happy to be there? They got to move out of the tent. They were living in a tent until the 8th of January with 20 inches of snow on the ground. That was ordinary life. It truly was. Well, many years later, they built what they called the big cabin, I'll back up here, maybe. There we go. The big cabin, we call it a big living room today. And then a few years after that, they built a kitchen because they finally dug a well. And so they had running water in the house with a hand pump. After 13 years of drinking out of Harry Harbison's ditch, they finally had a kitchen with water inside. Okay? 20 inches of snow, you already saw it. Except the cabin wasn't connected. There was a breezeway in between them. You had to come out this door, go through the snowbank, and go back in the door there. Okay? Just to get inside the big cabin. What do you think? In addition, we all know Grand Lake winters. Maybe some of you don't always know the winters, 20, 30 below zero. So you come out of the door and you dig this trail out. And if it snowed 3 or 4 inches, of course, you dig the other trail this way, off to the right, to the outhouse. So you can use the outhouse at 25 below zero. Ordinary life on the ranch. It truly was. This was Kitty's cabin. And it's really, really hard to see, but way over here, that's the corner. That's the back corner of the big cabin, so it wasn't that far away. All these pictures were taken in the late 1960s, but that sod roof is the original roof on Kitty's cabin from 1897. I'd like to read again to you. This is a couple years later. First, I want to show you a picture of the family. This is down near the beach of Grand Lake. Father took the picture, so he's not in it. But on the left is mother. In the middle are the 2 daughters. Kitty is sitting down. Rob, their brother, is sitting to the right. It doesn't look like he's 19 years old in this picture, but this picture was taken just a few months before his 20th birthday. And that's Annie standing up behind him. This picture is very telling. I'm going to refer back to this picture a little bit later, so remember their ribbons and the beautiful hats and dresses and stuff. But this picture tells a lot about the 2 girls and how different they were. They were almost 4 years apart in age, but they were like twins. They were inseparable. They were very, very close to each other. Look at Annie's hands on Kitty's shoulders. Okay. Let me give you a recipe. Say a recipe calls for 2 eggs. Well, Kitty might say, wouldn't it be okay with 1? Annie, well, how much better would it be with 3? That's how different the girls were. It was written about Annie Harbison many times that she would dance all night long and go home and milk all the cows the next morning. Okay, she was the life of the party. I mean, look at that smile, looking off into the trees, just full of life. Kitty, very laid back, very conservative, very much like her mother. Okay, Rob, in this picture, it's kind of hard to see. Rob Harbison was partially blind all of his life. He worked on shadows. He could walk through the forest without hitting trees and stuff, but he worked a lot on shadows. He could read. He had to have a big magnifying glass hold his right up next to him, but he could read a newspaper or magazines, that kind of stuff. But he was partially blind all of his life. Lots of stories in Grand Lake later about Rob Harbison being lazy or an albino. He had a very, very light texture on his skin, and he was partially blind, so he moved really, really slow. Because of that, he was considered lazy by many people that knew him. Okay? But I'm going to read from Andrew's journal again. He wrote this almost 2 years to the day from the one I read in 1897. He wrote this on January 27th, 1899. All hands breaking roads and shoveling snow off the buildings. Mr. Snore and Mr. Hedrick was here this evening. They tried to get to Grand Lake, but stuck in the snow and had to turn back. Snowed most of the day. The snow is about 49 inches deep. This is the deepest snow I've seen in 30 years. Remember that 20-inch snow in a moderate winter? This was the winter of 1898-1899, the second worst winter in Colorado's history, first being 1913. But this was the worst winter, second worst in the state. But this was a terrible winter. Instead of 20 inches, they had over 4 feet of snow. Mr. Snore was Henry Snore. He owned the next ranch beyond the Harbisons, so, as I mentioned earlier, the Green Mountain Ranch. Mr. Hedrick and his family owned the ranch about a mile further up the valley. Mr. Snore did not homestead. He bought that ranch from a Mr. Hertel, but the Hedricks did homestead. But they were trying to walk down to Grand Lake, and they couldn't make it through 4 feet of snow. Okay, they just couldn't. So they spent the night at the Harbison Ranch and turned around and went home. Okay. A few months later, Andrew wrote in his journal on April 3rd, he said, Rob went to Cairns for potatoes, packed 45 pounds home, left 60 pounds to be got tomorrow. James Cairns owned the local mercantile store here in Grand Lake. So Rob went to town, a mile away, packed 45 pounds of spuds on his back and went home. Everyday life. On April 4th, the next day, Andrew wrote, Annie and Kitty went to Grand Lake to settle with Cairns. Rob went also after potatoes, brought another 45 pounds on his back. We got a very large mail today. Okay. Simple, right? But 10 days later, Annie wrote about April 13th, 1899. She said, attempted to take the horses down on the Stillwater Range. Got about a quarter mile from home, couldn't go no further, and couldn't get them home. Came home, got shoveled, dug down to the ground, making them nice box stalls of snow. Took them hay, water, and blankets. They were very comfortable. We only had 3 horses to shovel for. Snow next to the cabin, 36 inches deep. On April 13th, 3 feet of snow still on the ground. Okay? The Stillwater Range that I mentioned is where Shadow Mountain Lake is now. The animals would be just turned loose out there in the wintertime. The wind blows down there a lot more than it does at the ranch, and the animals could just scratch a little bit of feed here and there, but they couldn't get them there. So, one day at a time for 3 days after that, early in the morning, when there was a little bit of crust on the snow, they would go and coax one of the horses up kind of almost on top of the snow and get them back that quarter of a mile back to the ranch. The next day at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, they would go down when the snow had a little bit of crust, and they'd coach the horse up on the snow and take it a quarter mile back to the ranch. And the third day, they got the third horse back. Rob came down and bought some hay from James Cairns, because James Cairns had some land and he had a little grass. And so they borrowed money from James Cairns at 4% interest and bought some hay from James Cairns to feed their horses for the rest of the spring, because they didn't have any feed for them at 3 feet of snow. Okay? Well, Andrew would write in his journal. Now this was many months later. This is in June. And this is one of the few times he wrote in his journal how long it took to do something. So I think it was some kind of a record. He wrote, June 27th, started to Empire for provisions. Now, this time he was on a horse. Returned the 30th, making the trip in 3 days and 5 hours. Provisions and expenses, $70. I'm going to the grocery store. I'll be back in, maybe 4 or 5 days. You know, the ice cream was probably melted every time he got back. Got provisions and expenses, $70. And he brought about half of it back. They didn't have everything. They delivered it the 1st of August. I'm going to the store. I've got my list. They've got that, they don't have that. They've got that, they don't have that. Okay, they'll bring that stuff to me in a month. That was ordinary life. That's how you had to be ready for what was going to happen throughout the time. Okay? Well, about that same time in 1899, actually 1900, here's a great photo of Kitty Harbison. Lovely lady. Look at how laid back she was. I mentioned a man's name a little while ago, Mr. Henry Schnorr. Henry Schnorr was a contractor here in Grand Lake. He built some buildings that still stand today. But Henry Schnorr came down the road past the Harbison Ranch, right through the middle of the ranch. And of course, he was a good neighbor. He'd stop every 2-3 days and have coffee and chat with the Harbisons and everything. You know what I'm going to tell you. Henry Schnorr fell in love with Kitty Harbison. Asked her to marry him. And Kitty Harbison said yes. So they were sitting around the cabin in 1900, and apparently she and her sister were talking about the wedding that was going to be at the Harbison Ranch, and we think that Kitty turned to her sister and said, I can't marry Henry Schnorr. And of course Annie would have said, heavens, why not? And she said, well, mother and father are getting much older now, and they help, but you know, it's kind of hard on both of them. Father with his foot missing, his heel missing. Rob helps around the ranch, but he's kind of slow. He helps us milk the cows, but mostly he delivers the milk downtown. And you know, you can't run this ranch by yourself. Not only that, it hadn't been 5 years. If Kitty would have gotten married, half of the Harbison Ranch would have gone away. So she changed her mind. She got on a horse, rode up the mile to Henry Schnorr's ranch, and jilted him. Said, I've changed my mind, I can't marry him. For you men in the audience, Henry Schnorr was in love. I know he was. Henry Schnorr was a contractor. He went back to Green Mountain Ranch, and he added that bay window on the west side of his kitchen because Kitty Harbison loved her geraniums. Well, after Henry was jilted, about a year later, he met another lady here in Grand Lake. They got married. Subsequently, they had 2 little girls, but he'd still stop for coffee all the time. He's a pretty good guy, apparently, and he'd stop and chat with the Harbisons and everything at the ranch on his way into Grand Lake to go to work. Okay. One more time, I'll read from Andrew's journal. He wrote this on Sunday the 30th. Do you like his handwriting? Isn't that incredible how legible it is? You know, most people when they wrote, especially in cursive, back in the 1880s and 1890s and so forth, when this was going on, you couldn't read that chicken scratch to save your soul. But Andrew was very legible. He wrote this on Sunday the 30th. The month of December is ended, and with it has ended the year 1899, also the 19th century. The month has been very favorable for outdoor work, cold at night, but mostly moderate in daytime. There's another one of those moderate winters. We have progressed some considerable in the year just ended. We have 4 horses and 5 cows. We have bought in the year 1 set of harness, 1 sled, 1 pair of 4-year-old mares, a sewing machine, a riding saddle, and some other affairs too numerous to mention, amounting in all about $395. Where in the world did the Harbisons get $400? It wasn't his pension check at $10 a month. The girls got jobs. Well, Mom and Dad and Rob were building the house and the barn and the corrals and stuff like that. Annie and Kitty in the summertime came down to Grand Lake and they started getting jobs. They worked at some of the hotels and even some private homes as maids and waitresses and stuff. They worked at the Kaufman House for several summers. They worked at other hotels and some private homes, but they always worked together. They insisted on that. They became known as the Harbison Girls. Actually, the girls. Everybody knew them as the girls. Yeah, everybody knew their name were Annie and Kitty, but it was just the girls, okay? They did that for several years. Finally, in 1901, when Mrs. Kaufman decided to leave Grand Lake, because she had about enough of the wintertime, Ezra Kaufman didn't have a clue how to run the Kaufman house. He really didn't. So he leased the hotel to Annie and Kitty Harbison for 2 summers. And they made a little bit more money doing that than just working there. And consequently, in 1902, they were finally able to quit working and work consistently out at the ranch. They were selling more milk and that kind of stuff. So, but that's how they raised a little bit of money to buy all those goods. The next day, Annie wrote about January 1st, 1900. New Year's. Several of the neighbors were here for dinner. The day was clear and moderate. All seemed to enjoy themselves for a good old-fashioned way. It looks like that the 1st of January, New Year's Day, people would get together and lie to each other how good the winter was going. Tell each other how good the winter was going. But, you know, in 1900, there probably weren't 20 people in a 10-mile radius around Grand Lake. And so they'd get together at somebody's house for New Year's. 1900, it appears that it was the Harbison's turn. Okay, they all got together for dinner, and of course that's when dinner was still considered what we say for lunch. So it was a midday meal at the Harbison house. That's all. They enjoyed themselves in a good old-fashioned way. Wintertime. Rob Harbison was delivering milk downtown. By the way, in this milk can right here on the stage. That is Rob Harbison's milk can from the Harbison Ranch. He would carry that up and down the streets, delivering milk out of it. It survived the fire, that's why it looks so bad. The lid's missing from the fire. I lost that in the fire, but the milk can did survive, but that actually was Rob Harbison's milk can that he delivered milk out of. His customers were complaining. Rob, we have to see you every day at the hotel. Some of the private homes, we have to see you every other day. We can't keep the milk cold. So one winter, he and his father got together and they came up with an idea. What if we go down to Grand Lake in the wintertime? We'll cut blocks of ice out of the lake, bring them up to an ice house at the ranch, and keep them cold all summer long, and we can deliver ice with the milk. Right? So they built an ice house. They came down to the lake. That's the sleigh that Rob built to deliver or take the milk up to the ice house. That's Molly and Polly. They're 2 horses. But Rob would cut 2-foot squares blocks of ice out of Grand Lake, okay, and take it up to the ice house. But he had to keep it cold all summer long so they could deliver ice. How did they do that? Come on, somebody can say it. You guys have heard this. Sawdust. They had sawdust everywhere. They'd been cutting down trees to build cabins and fences for the corral and the barn and everything else. They had sawdust everywhere. They'd covered this ice up with about 1 foot to 1.5 foot of sawdust, and Rob could deliver ice in September. I think it was a financial decision. They were selling a quart of milk for 5 cents, but they could sell ice for 10 cents. I think it was totally financial. Okay. Well, many years later, here's another picture of cutting ice. That's Rob Harbison standing in the back of the wagon, cutting ice for the Harbison. Now, you know this is years later. There's a car out there on the lake. That's the Grand Lake Yacht Club in the background, and it was built in 1912. Okay, but there's a gentleman behind the little wagon there with a block of ice on there. That's an ice saw. It's similar to a 2-man wood saw, but the teeth are set a little bit different. It's made just for cutting ice. And as I said, that's Rob in the wagon with a couple blocks of ice already up there to take it up to the Harbison Ranch, because they continued selling ice with their milk for many, many years. 2 things. The Harbisons did not invent the ice house. It had been around for a long, long time, okay? They had the first ice house in the Grand Lake area. Right after that, several people had ice houses at their home. Very small ice houses because they could cut a couple blocks of ice and last all summer long. Okay, James Cairns was one of the first people to have an ice house right next to his home. But the Harbisons delivered ice with their milk for many, many years after this. Okay. I know I've got some mathematicians in the house. 1901 came along. It had been 5 years. They filed their paperwork with the federal government in 1895. They got the homestead permission in 1896. 1901, 5 years later, they sent their paperwork to Washington. And in 1902, they got their land patents. One for Annie and one for Kitty. Finally, they both owned their 160-acre lot for a 320-acre ranch in 1902. It only took 7 years for a 5-year government program. About like today, right? Okay? But finally, in 1902, they owned the entire 320-acre Harbison Ranch. Okay? A couple years went by. In 1906, Father passed away. Andrew passed away in 1906. Think of the life that man led. Served in the Civil War, went back to his family, served a second time in the Civil War as a volunteer. His left heel was shot off. They sewed him up. He lost hearing in one ear. Went back to his wife and said, I'm going to move to Missouri and start life over again because it's so beautiful. Started a second family. Moved to Colorado to start life over again. Moved to Grand Lake when he was 66 years old to start life over again. Walking on the toes of his left foot. Passed away in 1906. About that same time, Harry had just about given up on raising trout at Columbine Lake. His first wife, Lulu, had left and taken their son over to Montrose in western Colorado, get away from some of the snow probably. But Harry found another lady here in Grand Lake and they got married. It didn't last. Apparently it wasn't any good. About 8 months later, Harry wanted a divorce. So he got on his horse, he rode over to Hot Sulphur Springs, the county seat. Of course, by horseback, that's about a 5-hour ride, okay? Went over to, you can imagine him standing at the counter at the county courthouse saying, you know, I need to fill out my paperwork to divorce my second wife. You know, while I'm here, let me go ahead and do the paperwork to divorce my first wife too. Well, he was only married to a couple women for a few months, okay? He divorced his second wife because he met a lady by the name of Betty, and she owned a 2-story building downtown Grand Lake, and he wanted to open a grocery store, a mercantile. So he married Betty so he could open the Harbison store. Many of you have seen it, it's on our historic walking tour. But there's a sign up on top of it that says post office. Harry was the postmaster. Fine, upstanding gentleman in our community. All right, so he was married to 2 women at the same time, okay? But the second story of the building, he kept almost totally empty for town dances and town meetings and stuff like that. He also had a shelf real high because that's where he kept his liquor so his wife didn't know he drank. The whole town knew Harry Harbison drank. It wasn't a surprise to his wife at all, but that was his story and he stuck to it for years, okay? Betty put up with him for a few years and she finally had had enough of Harry Harbison's being a scoundrel, and he was. So she left him, she did get a divorce, and she moved down to Greeley and married a newspaper man down there. Harry kept the store for a little while, kept it open, and the store finally closed. He wandered around, did a few odd jobs here in Grand Lake, and eventually followed his ex-wife to Greeley and got some odd jobs down there. He's buried in one of the cemeteries in Greeley. Okay, but so Harry had some scams going on off and on. We don't have hours and hours to go into all of them, but he truly was a scoundrel. He opened the grocery store to compete with James Cairns because he didn't like the freight that James Cairns was adding to some of his merchandise. And Harry said, I won't charge you freight on that. Go to the Coppin House, they'll tell you all about that story. I know they will.
So can we say this is the mushroom shop now?
Yes, that's a mushroom shop now.
Uh-huh.
Yep, still has a sign on the front of it that says the Harbison store as on the walking tour. Yep, good call, Donna. I've got to warn you guys, the next picture truly is a woman. That's Mary Harbison. That's Mom. I've seen other pictures of Mary, big smile on her face, everything else. This, again, was a studio picture, very much like the first one that I showed you of Andrew. When you're in a museum, especially the Kaufman House, if you see a picture in an oval like this, a lot of times in an oval frame, those are studio pictures, not always, but usually. And again, they were very expensive. Look at her. She said, I'm not going to mess up, I'm not going to mess up, I'm not going to mess up. It's a month's salary to have your picture taken. And if you flinch, it's another month's salary to have your picture taken. So, if you want to see this up close and in person, go to the Kaufman House, climb the stairs. They're hanging. Andrew and Mary's oval pictures are on the wall in the Kaufman House. Okay? Andrew passed away. Mary wrote a letter to the Civil War Commission, said, I'm Andrew Harbison's widow. I'd like to continue receiving his pension check. And I'm going to paraphrase some letters I'm going to be talking about. But the Civil War Commission wrote her a nice letter back and says, please accept our condolences. What about the first Mrs. Harbison? Mary wrote back and said, I've been married to Andrew for a little over 30 years. The first Mrs. Harbison has been dead roughly 35 years. Please send me my check. The Civil War Commission wrote a letter back and said, well, we've received a letter from Mrs. Andrew Harbison in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and she says she was his wife, and she would like his pension check. So Mary wrote a letter back to the Civil War people and said, you've got the wrong lady. Okay? I've confirmed with Harry that his mother has been dead for almost 35 years. You've got the wrong lady. Send me my check. The Civil War people wrote Mary Harbison a letter and said, well, here's a copy of a letter we received. What do you mean Harry says I'm dead? He visited me 2 summers ago and borrowed money from my second husband. Last summer he was here visiting his sister. What do you mean he says I'm dead? The first Mrs. Harbison was very much alive. Like so many Civil War veterans, Andrew Harbison simply walked out on his first wife. The first few months he probably did send a few dollars back to her, but eventually he just said the heck with it. And he went married a second lady. So he was married to 2 women for 30 years. Like father, like son. Okay. But wait, I told you at the beginning that Andrew told his son Harry that his mother had died and his little sister was being raised by her grandparents, and I told you that was true. And it was true. I stretched it a little bit. We don't know why, but Harry's little sister was actually raised by her grandparents. We don't know why her mom didn't raise her. No record of it, but she was literally raised by her grandparents. So I just kind of stretched it a little bit for you. This nonsense went on for almost 2 years with these letters going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Finally, the first Mrs. Harbison in Altoona, Pennsylvania said, she obviously needs now $14 a month more than I do. Just give it to her. So they started paying Mary Harbison $14 a month, okay? They didn't go back for 2 years and make up all that difference, but they did. They started sending Mary Harbison $14 a month, okay? While all of that nonsense was going on, remember Henry Schnorr that Kitty jilted? Comes back into the story. His wife left him. She went to him probably in the middle of the winter and said, I am not staying in this God-forsaken country any longer, and she left. But she did something different that most women didn't do when they left. What do you think that might have been? She left the kids. Henry Schnorr now had a 4-year-old daughter and about a 14-month-old baby. The baby they carried around on a pillow. She hadn't learned how to walk. I don't know what was wrong with her. We do know a few months later she was walking. But Henry was a contractor. He was building buildings for people. He didn't know how to take care of his kids. Men didn't have a clue how to take care of children in 1900. I won't go into today. I won't even talk about it. But men's job wasn't to raise children. So Henry loaded the 2 daughters into his wagon and took them to an orphanage in Denver. He got down there and the people at the orphanage said, we got a whole building full of sick children that don't have any parents. You're their father. Take them home and do the best you can. So he did. He loaded them back in his wagon and he headed back to Green Mountain Ranch. You know what I'm going to say. He stopped at the Harbison Ranch. Okay? Well, what happened? Whoops. Here we go. There's Henry Schnorr at the Harbison Ranch. That's Henry with his older daughter Beatrice. The younger daughter was Mary, but that was mother's name, so they nicknamed her Mame or Mamie. And that's Annie holding her, and that's mother on the right. Kitty probably took the photo, and their dog Scout. Okay. Henry, was telling him the story about the daughters, and what did the girls say? Well, leave them here. We're women. We must know how to raise kids. Mother's right here. She can help out. Henry Schnorr decided to do that. He was not abandoning his daughters. He lived a mile away. He stopped every other day for coffee. This was just Grand Lake's first daycare center. Okay? He saw his daughters all the time. Okay? Well, a couple years after that, Henry met another lady here in Grand Lake. She had 2 children of her own. She'd lost her husband in a mining accident up the valley. And they got married and moved her out to Green Mountain Ranch, went down to the Harbisons and said, okay, girls, here's your new mom. Beatrice, who was about 6.5 at the time, she said, great, let's go. Mame wrapped her arms around Kitty and Annie and said, no, these are my mom. And face it, she was 14 months old when she got there. This is the only parent she really knew. Okay? Well, what did the new wife say? One less mouth I have to feed. Okay? And really it wasn't. And again, Mame stayed at the Harbison Ranch, but it wasn't abandonment. They were back and forth. They went to each other's homes all the time for dinner and stuff like that. Years later, her older sister Beatrice would get on her horse and ride back down to the Harbison Ranch because Mame had a pet porcupine that they could play with. Okay? I mean, it was that close. They really were. They were a mile apart at the most, okay? But that's how Mame got to grow up on the Harbison Ranch. The girls raised her almost like their own daughter. They really did, okay? But Mame grew up on the Harbison Ranch, and here's where I'm going to ask you to go back to that first picture of the girls down near the beach. Remember their hats and their bows and everything. Ranch life was not particularly kind to Annie and Kitty Harbison. Well, I keep forgetting, excuse me. That's Kitty on the left and Annie in the middle, and that's Mame as a young teenager. Yes, that is manure on the bottom of Annie and Kitty's skirts, because women wore skirts or dresses, and they went out and milked the cows in their skirts, wandered around in the manure in the corral. But Mame was a teenager, so she got to wear jeans. She actually graduated high school while she was living at the Harbison Ranch, and she continued living at the Harbison Ranch for many years. Okay? I'll back up a photo. I talked about work at the Harbison Ranch and everything. How about a Christmas tree? This is inside the big cabin. Beautiful Christmas tree. They would go out in the yard and cut down a Christmas tree, bring it in, decorate it, put popcorn strings on it, probably made a gift for each other. Okay, now this is a question for you, but answer it just to yourself. You don't have to answer me. How many of you remember putting popcorn strings on the Christmas tree, and then you go over and you, Wasn't that god-awful stuff after being on that string for 2-3 days? Or so I'm told by my mother. Okay, but they had popcorn strings and they had candles on their Christmas tree. They would normally celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve after dark so they could light the candles. The next day they came down to Grand Lake to go to church for Christmas. But they'd light their candles, exchange a couple gifts, and 15 minutes later Christmas was over. Because they had a dead tree inside a log cabin with live candles. Let's not burn the house down. So they blew the candles out and Christmas was over, okay? But there's books around the bottom of that tree. Andrew Harbison was a very well-read man. He'd read anything he could get his hands on. He made sure that the entire family was literate. And at the turn of our last century, 1900, it was a toss-up. Some women were literate and some women were illiterate. But Andrew made sure that the entire family could read and write very, very well, okay? And then I showed you Mame growing up on the Harbison Ranch. A few years start tumbling by, and in 1915, Rocky Mountain National Park was established. They did the dedication of Rocky Mountain National Park over near Estes Park on September 4th, 1915. What happens when you plan a party in the mountains of Colorado? It rains. hence the umbrellas and the long coats. September 4th, 1915, it rained off and on all day long during the dedication of Rocky Mountain National Park. Okay? A few more years tumble by, and a family came to Grand Lake in the summer of 1917. This was a well-to-do family. They had a second home up here, and the husband and wife, they had a 4-year-old daughter. And the 4-year-old daughter had a nanny that was taking care of her. Well, Rob was delivering milk to that house. Of course, he wasn't delivering it to the parents. That wasn't the job. He was delivering the milk to the nanny. What am I going to tell you? You know what I'm going to tell you. They fell in love. Rob Harbison stood 6'4", tall, strapping man, carried 2 of these milk cans down the street, delivering milk up and down the street to different homes and the hotels. All right, he moved a little bit slow and he was a little bit blind. He met a lady by the name of Myrnie Klein. Myrnie Klein was the nanny. If you stretched her, she came up to 5 foot nothing. They fell in love. And in December of 1917, they got married. She's standing up. You really see Rob's blindness in this picture. The lady on the right, Myrnie Klein, was my great aunt. That's my grandma's sister. We married into the Harbison family. And Ellen said it earlier that I'm related to the Harbisons, and that's how. I knew Uncle Rob and Aunt Myrnie very well when I was a little boy. I played at their house many, many times, okay, as I grew up. But very, very dear people to me. But that's Rob and Myrnie. Myrnie was 18. Her grandmother told her she couldn't get married until she was 18 years old, so 3 days after her 18th birthday, she married 39-year-old Rob Harbison. Even then, that was pretty widespread in years. It really was. They were truly in love. Uncle Rob called her Sugar. She was his Shug all the rest of their life. Okay? A few years later, Mother passed away, and then this picture was taken just after 1930. Mame stayed on the ranch, but Myrnie and Rob came down to Grand Lake and they opened a few rental cabins and renting them out, called them cozy cottages. They were still delivering a little bit of milk. They had an ice house downtown here. But the girls decided to hire a couple of gentlemen to help them milk and deliver the milk downtown. And they were living on the ranch. And Mame married one of those ranch hands. His name was Clyde Gudgel. They called him Red, dark red hair. But Mame got married and they had a son, Howard. That's Mame and her son, Howard, right there. That's Rob. That's, you know, it's Annie and Kitty. They're still holding hands after all those years. But that's Rob Harbison. Look at his pipe. I will always remember Rob Harbison's permanent crease in his lower lip where his pipe hung all the time. He was never without his pipe, okay? But that was Howard, born on the ranch. The only person to be born on the ranch. He was actually born in Annie's homestead cabin, okay? And their dog, Scout. It's a different dog. I've seen 4 different dogs on the Harbison Ranch, all collies and all named Scout. I don't know why, no explanation, just on the photo it said Scout. Maybe it's when they got to heaven they knew each other, okay? But they always had a dog named Scout out at the Harbison Ranch. Here's some of the ranch buildings at the Harbison Ranch. Again, this was taken in the late 1960s. But the 2-story building back here, that's the housing for the ranch hands. In front of it, that is a 4-hole outhouse. That's a chicken coop. That's their barn. You can see where they added different sections to it over the years. When I have children on my programs, I say, doesn't that barn look like it was a fun place to play? And of course they all say yes. I know it was. I never played in that barn, but my dad broke his arm when his little brother threw him out of the 2nd story of that barn. Because they played in it a lot up at the Harbison Ranch. Okay, a few of you kind of laughed and a little bit of groan, but not everybody. Yes, I did say 4-hole outhouse. Now, come on. Nobody's that good of friends. I'm sorry. Okay. Why did they have a 4-hole outhouse? Well, outhouses, when you dig them, you dig the pit really deep so you don't have to move it as often. You dig a hole at the Harbison Ranch, you're going to run into a boulder the size of a VW bug. It's one of the places that the glacier ended, carving the Kawanichi Valley. They have boulders that came all the way down the valley, and they're monstrous. So you can't dig more than 2-3 feet deep, and you run into rocks. So you stop. So Rob told my dad told me they built the outhouse sideways so it didn't fill up as fast. No, there was no assigned seating or anything like that, but it was just a matter of convenience. So some of you groaned. I mean, yeah, we know a 2-hole or a single-hole outhouse, but 4-hole outhouse, really? Yeah. This is one of my favorite pictures of the girls. This picture, I believe, was taken in the summer of 1938. This is one of those pictures we all hate. Come on outside real fast, I want to take your picture. Oh, no, I gotta brush my hair, let me change my shirt. I gotta get cleaned up a little bit. No, it didn't happen. Look at that. Kitty on the left, the taller of the two. She's a little taller than Annie by now. But flower on her skirt, a torn pocket on her skirt. Annie kind of rumpled a little bit, petting their dog Scout. And geraniums in the window. I'm going to read something to you. This was written by a dear friend of the Harbisons. Her name was Caroline Roan. Caroline Roan wrote a lot. She loved to write, and what I'm going to read is a short part of 11 pages of what she wrote. But she would write Christmas cards and send them to you. But she would write Christmas cards about what you did over the last year. She was kind of a gossip, I think. Don't tell Aaron I said that. Of course, Aaron's long gone. He and I, yeah. But anyway, Carolyn Roan wrote this. The Harbison girls are gone, and their going was as brave and simple and poignant as their living. The long winter shadows of the never summer range down the North Fork Valley will no longer fall upon their evening activities around the homestead. Spruce and pine boughs are heaped high over a double grave in the hilltop cemetery so near their ranch. Stricken with pneumonia 10 days ago, the lives of both Kitty, age 66, and Annie, age 70, were despaired of from the beginning. Kitty passed away at noon on Election Day. Annie lingered until dawn, Sunday, November 13th, 1938. Kitty took to her bed first. Annie, already ill, continued her work about the cabin, refusing to go to bed until she had cooked a good dinner. Then, with a temperature already near 105, she made a brave fight for her life, not knowing when Kitty was taken away to the little cabin. No one told her that Kitty had gone on ahead. The Harbison girls were part and parcel of the early pioneer life of Middle Park. Known and loved by the whole Grand Lake country, their home so typical of the early days, with sturdy log cabins giving a touch of hominess and a feeling of security and an atmosphere of real Western hospitality, has been visited by tourists the country over. Kitty and Annie's friends were not bounded by the mountains of Middle Park. And Grand Lake mourns as one family for the passing of the Harbison girls. All the countryside flocking to the funeral echoed the tribute paid by Charles Hulack, the pastor of the Grand Lake Community Church. He said, Annie and Kitty Harbison were typical of the pioneer stock which has furnished the sinews and courage necessary in opening this new frontier which this mountain country has been. They and kindred souls like them have furnished the backbone for the development of this great nation of ours. Living quietly and unobtrusively, they have lived a good life and have filled their niche in this world with little left undone behind them. When Annie and Kitty were ill, of course it was covered on the front page of the local newspaper, what's now the Sky News. But the Associated Press picked it up. And they sent it out on the wire system. And when they fell ill from their pneumonia, it was on the front page of the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News that the Harbison girls were ill. A few days later, after their passing, the local paper, of course, covered it on front page, and again the AP picked it up and sent it out. The Denver Post covered it on page 3, the Rocky Mountain News covered it on page 1, that the Harbison girls of Grand Lake had passed. Because it was on the Associated Press wire service, 67 newspapers in the United States covered the story of the passing of the Harbison girls, including page 7 of the New York Times. Annie and Kitty's friends were not bounded by the mountains of Middle Park. After the girls passed, their brother, who had property downtown, did not inherit the ranch. They left the ranch to Mame, the girl that Kitty, the daughter of the man that Kitty jilted, now owned the entire 320-acre Harbison Ranch. Okay? But Rob designed their headstone. He made it with 2 tree branches because he said, in death as in life, the girls were always close. So when you're up at the Harbison, at the cemetery, and you see the Harbison plot, I hope to have a fence back around it. The fence got beat up in the fire, but you will see Kitty and Annie's headstone. Okay? The Harbison Ranch. In the early 1960s, or excuse me, late 1960s, the park made a decision that the Harbisons were kind of an ordinary family. There was nothing historically significant about the Harbison Ranch or the Harbison family. So he gave the Park Service the permission to remove the buildings. So in 1970, the park used them for fire department practice and burned them to the ground. And that's why we don't see them. They were located, when you go up 492, they were located behind the maintenance yard of the National Park Service. And they were still standing when they built that maintenance yard. Okay? There's lots more to say about the Harbisons. We're limited on time. But now it's your turn. What are you doing that 100 years from now, somebody in your family wants to write about your extraordinary life? Thank you.
I'll be glad to answer a few questions if you'd like.
And for the rest of us who have this sudden urge to go out and do something substantial, I have that at the moment. But please stop for dessert first, okay?
Yes, please do.
We have lots left. And he does answer questions, so come on down.
I love
Thank you
to
for
talk,
being here.
and as you found out, I love to talk about me.
Yeah, that way we can all hear. Yeah.
Would you go around? Would you go around? Anybody have, who's got the first question? Come on.
Who's back there? Oh, it's Sandia.
Oh, Sandia, I don't know if I can answer your question.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know that, all you people know that we have the Harbison store safe in the gallery at the Kaufman House. Yes, there is.
It was in Harry Harbison. That's the Harry Harbison safe.
Yes. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Oh, come on, don't be shy.
Well, they're going to come and accost you, so they're just not doing it publicly. All right, but feel free. Oh, we've got one. Oh, good.
Do I have a map of their 320-acre ranch? No. I know exactly where the boundaries are. It's real easy. Right across the street. Here, no, me.
Right across the street from the Kawanichi Visitor Center, the National Park Visitor Center, literally across Highway 34, about 15 feet in, is the corner of the Harbison Ranch. That's the southeast corner of their ranch, and it went for a half a mile that way and 1 mile north, okay? Just about literally across from the parking lot at Kawanichi Visitor Center. The Harbison picnic area that we all have seen, we've driven around that big corner and there's the Harbison picnic area. It's not on their ranch. It overlooks their ranch toward the south, but it's literally a couple hundred feet off of the Harbison Ranch. Great question.
North, would that be the northeast corner or the southeast?
Southeast corner, right across from the Kawanichi. The northeast corner is almost to the
Harbison picnic area. And up there, because if you notice it, Highway 34 actually makes a little bit of a bend just past the Kawanichi Visitor Center, and when it does, when you go through the gate of the park, you're actually on the Harbison Ranch. You're within the boundaries of the ranch. It's that close. Yes, sir.
David, thank you. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
David, when did the Holsworth family up from that corner?
They came in
When
way
did
later.
they come? Did they come much later?
They were way later. They were 19 years after the Harbisons. And they truly were dear, dear friends. I'm excited that Fran's going to be here. She's got some questions for me. The Harbisons and the Holsworths were dear, dear friends. They were almost like next door neighbors, even though they were 10 miles apart. They were very dear friends. So,
Thank you.
you bet. Who else? All right, well, again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this evening. Please remember the Grand Lake Historical Society.